What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be talking about scientific style. This is in reference to scientific writing. This may be less pertinent to know for assessing the validity of a scientific study itself, and maybe more important at assessing a good scientist, whether or not they're good at writing research. I think it's important to teach. I think this is an important component of science generally, if we're going to look at science holistically. If you're solely concerned with the contents of a scientific paper, this may be less important for you. I'm going to keep this very short today. I know the last one was long. We're going to keep it concise, and we're going to try and apply good scientific style to this presentation. And it may not reflect the truthfulness of a paper. Indirectly, it does. Indirectly, it does have to do with the truthfulness of a paper, right? Because if you're not conveying the information properly, if you're not conveying in words what you're doing in real life properly, accurately, clearly, it's not actually going to get interpreted in the right way, right? There's no room for abstractness. There's no room for interpretation in science. We're concerned with objective truth here. What is the scientific style? Well, it's essentially good scientific writing. Simply, that's what it is. Okay, good component of scientific style is accessibility. Papers should be accessible to people. Obviously, journals gatekeep a little bit. It's expensive to read literature if it's not open access, and open access costs roughly $10,000 a paper for the scientists. Now, it should be accessible to the reader. There should be a good table of contents. There should be good organization within the study. There should be good tables, clear figures. There should be an abstract. There should be clear sections, proper headings, things like this. Okay, another important component is comprehensiveness. Paper should be a self-contained document. It should contain everything the reader needs to know to understand the research, the paper, right? This is good formatting. We discussed this a couple videos ago, the IMRAD formatting. Introduction, methods, results, and discussion is part of this, right? You should include all these sections. Obviously, papers don't really miss this. It wouldn't get through a peer review process. But they should all be comprehensive within themselves as well. A good overview of the literature, right? We went over this in our video a couple times ago, right? It should be a complete, holistic view of the literature, right? Positive, negative, neutral results, not just things that support your argument, right? A complete view of the literature so that you can understand the paper, right? That's the whole purpose. Should be comprehensive. This is foundational. Of course, papers should be accurate. Accuracy is a very important part of science. Mistakes are careless or they're fraudulent. Fundamentally, these are things that should never ever happen in papers. Errors should never happen. Errors in reasoning and logic should also never happen, right? I accept logical fallacies and errors in reasoning when you're speaking, right? It's much harder to assess yourself when you're speaking constantly, but if you're writing a paper and rereading it over and over and over again, you shouldn't be making these errors. The contents of the paper itself should be accurate as well. It should be factual. It should be true, right? To the best of your knowledge, at least. Now, I would disagree that, the literature is accurate. I think the literature is quite polluted with poor studies. I think it's careless, and I think we've gotten away from what true science is, from true scientific style, from the true scientific components of the paper, from logic and reason. I think we've gotten away from that. I think money's infiltrated it. But to remain on point here, information must be accurate. It's simple. It should be accurate. Not always the case, but it should be accurate. The paper should be clear. You should be using vocabulary that, of course, is specific enough to convey the point in a truthful manner, in a precise manner. But it should be simple enough for people to be able to understand it, right? There's no need to overcomplicate things, especially in the literature. You read an abstract and you read it and you're like, I didn't understand any of that. Right? It's not very clear. It's not very accessible, that's for sure. Right? I think that's a major problem. There's no need to overcomplicate things. You should keep it simple. You should keep it clear. You should keep it concise. You don't want to use abstract terms, right? There should be no interpretation of what this means, right? That's where using the right words are necessary, right? And maybe complex words are a necessary component of that, but you should avoid them at all costs, right? There should be no abstraction. There should be no literary style of writing. It should all be scientific style. There should be no hyperboles or personifications, right? It should be clear. Good scientific style should be concise. Again, this is really difficult to do. This is the most difficult thing to do. Harder to implement in something like this that we're doing here and talking, right? To be concise in your speech is a greater challenge, but to be concise in your writing is less challenging, for sure. Should be a priority, right? You can use 1,000 words to describe an apple. Do you need 1,000 words? No, right? This is what conciseness is. You want to remove all the flabby words, all the meaningless words. Actually this, or right, saying right at the end of everything. You don't implement this in your writing, right? People speak in different ways, but when you're writing, you want to exclude all of these words that are meaningless. Okay, you need your paper to be correct. This is more referring to grammar. I would say logic, reasoning. You should use correct arguments, right? There should be no logical fallacies. There often are. There should be no grammatical errors. This is what you don't really see in scientific literature. Of course, the scientific literature should be completely objective. There should be no emotions. There should be no values. You should really let the data speak for itself, right? The data needs to be objective as well. Something that's not always seen, but that's fraud. It needs to be objective, right? The writing needs to be objective. And of course, precision is fundamental. Everything needs to be absolutely precise. You need to know exactly what you mean by each word. Words really, really matter in science, right? The precision also has to do with the organization. It has to do with the alignment of the paper, right? There should be precision here. And it's really important that you keep it precise. You could keep it precise and you could keep it concise. You could keep it precise and clear. You can keep it precise and accessible and comprehensive and objective, right? All of this has to do with scientific style. You need to include all of this. This has to do with quality, with the quality of the paper, right? And it may not reflect the truthfulness of a paper. Indirectly, it does. Indirectly, it does have to do with the truthfulness of a paper, right? Because if you're not conveying the information properly, if you're not conveying in words what you're doing in real life properly, accurately, clearly, it's not actually going to get interpreted in the right way, right? There's no room for abstractness. There's no room for interpretation in science. We're concerned with objective truth here. So it's not right to say that this should be omitted from assessing a paper, right? Of course, it assesses more the quality of the scientist, of the researcher themselves. But it would be unfair to say, I think, that this has nothing to do with the quality of scientific literature, right? It certainly does have something to do with the literature itself. Maybe not the truth itself, except for maybe accuracy or correctness or objectivity, but it certainly has to do with the scientific literature, right? And that's what we're concerned with. We're learning how to assess the scientific literature. Obviously, if a paper is not extremely precise, or if it's a little unclear or a little inconcise, or if it's not comprehensive, right? If you need to do a little further research to understand the parameters of the paper, if it's not very accessible, these don't necessarily mean that what's in the paper is bad. It just means that it's a bad paper, right? It just means that it's a bad paper. It doesn't mean that it's incorrect. It just means that it's a bad paper. Bad papers, in my opinion, are problematic. I think they're extremely problematic because they're not conveying what's out there. It pollutes the literature. It makes the literature less credible, in my mind. The literature is absolutely incredible. It's incredible, right? It's certainly polluted, is the best way to say it, right? There's bad science, there's bad data, there's bad writing, there's bad accuracy, right? So I think that's important to understand. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. As I said, I think this is important to know. It's a little shorter, quick to take notes. You got these components. This is what you got to follow. It's that simple. If you guys enjoyed it, give us a like, share, comment. You can donate down below if you like what I do here. Everything's going to go right back into it. I'd really appreciate that. It's not necessary. Nevertheless, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and take care.